Hello everyone, it's Jess and welcome back to my channel, Nose in a Book. I'm going to be doing kind of some mini reviews of the books that I have read since I was gone. So I picked out 5 of them. I decided not to pick any of my least favorites, but just kind of go with some of the ones I really loved and I wanted to talk about. So this is in no particular order. I do have like some 4-star and some 5-star books, so I'll tell you what I rated them, but I'm not like rating them in order of like least to greatest or anything in this video. So that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So the first book I wanted to talk about today is At Home with Madame Chic by Jennifer L. Scott. Now this is a little different than the books I usually read, but you've probably seen this on multiple TBRs of mine. Jennifer L. Scott writes a series called the Madame Chic series, and it all talks about just kind of living your life in a chic way with that certain je ne sais quoi, and like kind of how we go about our daily life as an art, like as the art of daily living, rather than just kind of throwing it all aside and just being like, yeah, it's just whatever, it's just another day. I really love her writing style. This particular volume is the second one. This one is following kind of just different things you can do around your home and in your home routines that help your home life feel like it's for you, and like you're able to take the time and breathe and have space for yourself and feel like you live in a happy, lovely place, like you love where you are. And I just really loved that about this book. This book is one of the things that inspired me to kind of get some things around my apartment organized and take care of my like space that I was living in so that I felt better in it. And I really highly recommend her series. And she also has a YouTube channel which she talks about like how she applies a lot of these principles to her day-to-day life. She answers questions and she's just a lovely human being. I've talked about her a ton and I will link her channel down below so you guys can go check her out. But I highly recommend this series if you guys are looking for any lifestyle type books. Pick these up if you're interested. I gave this one 5 stars. The next book was my first read for the Getting Teen Trashed book club, so that was like 2 months ago, and I really enjoyed it, and that was Once Upon a Dream by Liz Braswell. So this book is a twisted fairy tale retelling of Sleeping Beauty. So if you like Sleeping Beauty and you like fairy tale retellings, I highly recommend this book. I do know that Liz Braswell has written a couple of other twisted retellings. One is A Whole New World, which is an Aladdin one, and one is a Beauty and the Beast one. I think it's Tale as Old as Time, something like that. Might just be Old as Time, something like that, which I haven't read those yet. So I believe the series is actually affiliated with Disney, so it is like you can actually read it and kind of see the Disney movie in your head and all of the characters and how they fit into the story. They're very well described as if straight out of the movie. So I really liked that element of it. And this premise of the twisted fairy tale retelling is, what if Sleeping Beauty never woke up? So basically, when the prince kisses Sleeping Beauty, instead of her waking up and breaking the spell, he actually falls asleep and ends up in her dream. And it's so cool, and there's so many different elements to this, and I didn't spoil anything. I promise those are all things you can read on the dust jacket here, but I really liked this one a lot. And it's your just classic fairy tale retelling, but with this little twist that throws everything else off, and it kind of makes it a whole new story basically. The things I really liked about this book is it actually dealt with depression, and I was not expecting that out of this book at all, but it really went into some really great details on the emotional havoc that depression can wreak on a person and how it can affect their decision making. It was really hard to read in some points, but it was really great. And then character-wise, I really did love Aurora. Sometimes she got on my nerves at the beginning, but then as we kind of saw her come into her own, she got better and better, and I just really enjoyed her character a lot more, and I ended up relating to her character a lot. And then I loved Prince Philip. Now, Prince Philip is just a little muffin, and I love him, and he is so pure, but not in like a cheesy way, like just in like, he's like He's like the classic, pure, like Prince Charming in like the best way possible in here. And I just absolutely loved that. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars. The next one is a little bit different for me as well, and that is the Unicorn Treasury by Bruce Coville. Well, it's compiled by Bruce Coville. This is a like compilation of short stories and poems and like excerpts from other books. So I usually don't read too many of those. I usually read full novels, but this one was a lot of fun. I really love unicorns, and I love like series about unicorns, and I love folklore about unicorns. They're just lovely, and I just enjoyed most of the stories in this book. Now that being said, there were some that I was just like, meh, that was nice, but not that great. Honestly, with a lot of the poems, like they weren't as artistic as I would have wanted them to be, for them to be a poem about unicorns. Like a lot of them kind of just felt like they were written by children, which is fine, but it wasn't exactly what I was expecting. But there were some excerpts from A Swiftly Tilting Planet by Madeline L'Engle, which I love that book, and a couple other books that I haven't read. There was an excerpt from The Last Battle by C.S. Lewis. So anything that really had unicorns in it, they had some of those excerpts in here. But then my favorites were some of the like fairy tales that people had written about unicorns. And my absolute favorite one, let me figure out the name of it because I'm going to forget. So my absolute favorite story in this book was The Princess, the Cat, and the Unicorn by Patricia C. Reed. And that one was so whimsical, so hilarious. The unicorn was so different than they are in almost every single story, and definitely every single story in here. It was a completely different unicorn, basically. And it was so sweet and lovely, and I just adored it. This book also has some beautiful illustrations, and my favorite one was actually also from that story, and that is this one here. Like, look at that. I love it because it's black and white, but you can see like the light shining down through the trees. It's just absolutely beautiful. So I loved this. I thought it was really great. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I would have given that story 5 out of 5 stars. It was so awesome. It like made me want to write a retelling of it like right then. I was just very happy with that story. So if you guys enjoy unicorns and unicorn folklore and different things like that, I would highly recommend picking this up, if just for that story, because that story was wonderful. So keeping with the fairy tale creatures type theme, my next book was a bit of a surprise for me about how much I liked it, and that is Tides by Betsy Cornwall. Now this is a Selkie story, and I love Selkies and mermaids. If you guys don't know the difference, mermaids are like half fish, half human, but Selkies are actually seals that shed their skin and become human when they leave their skin on the side, and they're like, you know, human walking around, and then they put their skin back on to go back into the water. And traditionally, usually the story revolves around some Selkie who has taken off their skin, and then they get their skin taken by a human, and then they're now kind of bound to that human until their skin is returned to them so they can return to the ocean. So this story totally surprised me. This follows our main character Noah and his younger sister Lo, who's adopted, I believe from China. And then he also follows Mara, who is a Selkie. And none of that is a spoiler. That's all stuff you know right away. So it actually comes from all 3 of their point of views, and I think perhaps one other point of view as well. But it was so great because as many point of views as there were in the story, it all melded together really well. And it didn't feel like it was mismatched or anything like that. It made the story flow really nicely. So it follows Noah, who has just got an internship at a marine biology lab, and it is just right near his grandmother's cottage on this island. So he kind of like takes the boat to work and everything, and he one day tries to rescue this girl who he thinks is drowning, but it's actually Mara, and she's a Selkie. And so there's like a whole bunch of story that follows them. And then it also follows his sister Lo, and Lo, like I said, is adopted from China, and she's dealing with an eating disorder. So that was dealt with so well in this book. It was not brushed aside. It was very strongly dealt with. The way that the family deals with it, the way that Mara deals with it, and the way that Lo ends up dealing with it throughout the book, I felt like was really well addressed, and I thought it was a totally different element, something I wasn't expecting at all. There's also some LGBTQ representation in this book as well, which I again wasn't expecting. And then this book also deals with abuse, emotional abuse, mental abuse, and even physical abuse, because there is a kidnapping. And so if any of those are triggers for you, like there's my trigger warning. There's a lot of emotional stuff happening in this book that I just was not expecting, but I felt like everything was dealt with so well, and it was all just kind of pulled together really nicely. And at the end of the book, I kind of was just waiting for the sequel. Now, as far as I know, there is not going to be a sequel, because this book has been out for quite some time, and it doesn't look like there's any news of there being a possible sequel or anything. And it does wrap up really nicely, and it leaves it kind of open-ended at the end. But yeah, when I finished it, I was looking for a sequel. That being said, I wasn't like trying to grab it and read it immediately again, so I did end up giving this 4 or 4.5 stars out of 5 rather than the full 5 stars, but I definitely really enjoyed it, and I highly recommend it if you like Selkie lore, or if you like if you're interested in reading about any of those topics that I talked about are in here. It's just dealt with really well, so I highly recommend this one. And yeah, I enjoyed it so much more than I was expecting to. The final book I wanted to talk about tonight is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. This was the ostentatious book club pick for, I think, July, August, maybe June, July, I can't remember. All I can say is I definitely did not finish it till September. This story, if you don't already know, follows 4 sisters, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and they're basically like growing up from childhood to adulthood and just everything that happens in their life. Not everything, but you know. And it was actually a reread for me, but I didn't remember anything going into this except for like 2 things. And so I don't even know if I fully read it the first time. Like I remember that I read it, but maybe I like just skimmed through it, because I didn't remember like most of what was happening in this book. And that's strange for me, because I usually remember most of the story, at least, if not like exact details. Like I usually remember most of the plot, and I just didn't remember anything when I was reading this. Now, if you guys follow me on Goodreads, you probably saw me complaining about how hard I was finding it to get into this book. Starting out the story was so difficult. This was randomly, like I would be reading it and I couldn't focus on the words. Like I would just be constantly distracted. I would lose my train of thought. I would have like flipped multiple pages and not even know what I read, and I was just getting really frustrated. And so I was like, this is terrible. Like, why am I having such an issue with this? And so I just kept plugging along through it, reading like a chapter a night, just like taking my time. I wasn't trying to rush through it. And finally, I forget what chapter it is, but I got into it where I felt like I knew the characters more and I was attached to them, and I found out their personalities, and I had a lot more interest in what was happening in their lives. And once that happened, I was so invested. I was like, it was so crazy. I was like so invested in the story. I wanted to know everything about everything. There's a romance obviously in here, and I was just like, I was invested. The other thing that I think played into me feeling more invested was that when I stopped trying to read it all in one sitting, each of these chapters is like a mini story. It's kind of like if you watched a television show and like there is an overarching plot, but mostly you're just kind of like each episode like wraps up in its own. And that's kind of how these chapters are. Like they all, like each chapter kind of wrapped up what it was talking about or what story it was talking about, but then of course there's still the overarching storyline that we follow with the 4 sisters. When I started reading it like a chapter or 2 chapters a night, I wasn't as overwhelmed, and then you get to know the characters, and then at some point I just didn't want to put it down because I wanted to know what was happening. There got like more overarching plot and it just kept going, and I was just like, I need to know. So I definitely ended up really enjoying it. I enjoyed the language. I enjoyed a lot of the smaller stories within this one. There were some stories with Meg especially that I really loved and that really made me laugh. And then of course Jo, who's almost the main character. Like if there's a main character, it's probably Jo. And I just loved her a lot. And sometimes she actually frustrated me, but most of the time I loved her. And then there's a romance, and I thought I felt one way about this romance. So going into the book, I was like, I feel this way about this. And then I'm reading it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so conflicted because I don't know how I feel. And I was shipping 2 different things at once. I was like totally sailing away on 2 separate ships, and I was very confused. And I think I know how I feel now, but I was still very confused. so much inner turmoil with this book. So this book made me laugh out loud, it made me cry, and I just absolutely adored it. So I highly recommend this. If you're having a hard time reading it, or if you pick it up and you start having a hard time reading it, just take it in little pieces and keep going. I loved it. It's absolutely wonderful. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. It was a rough beginning, but it definitely delivered, and I can't wait to read more of her books just because I'm now so invested in the family. I just need to know everything that ever happens to them. All right, everyone, so those are all the books I wanted to talk about today. Let me know down in the comments below if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them, or if you're planning on picking any of these books up. And I hope you're all having a wonderful October so far, and I'll see you tomorrow with another video. Bye!